This incident occurred in either January or February of 2023 at the time. I had recently turned 21 and was living in Ohio with my father. To provide some context, my life was directionless and it was incredibly naive. Having grown up in an affluent area of New York, I had attended private school in college, but I dropped out and was struggling with major depression. I was partying excessively, hanging out with the wrong crowd, and always finding myself in trouble. My mom, unsure of how to handle me, sent me to live with my father in Cleveland, Ohio. During my time in Ohio, I had been living in somewhat entitled teenage lifestyle. Apart from a job in retail, I didn't do much, and neither did my alcoholic father, who wasn't much help either. However, seeing him passed out in the living room one morning, coupled with being stuck in a dead-end job, made me yearn to return home to New York. Although my mom refused to let me live with her again, I reached out to my best friend at the time, whose mom was like family to me. Despite their limited financial means, they purchased a bus and train ticket for me to go back home, and they offered me a place to stay until I got back on my feet. It was a huge relief. While my dad was sad to see me go, he agreed to drop me off at the downtown bus station. However, he had to take me there before his work shift, which means I would have to wait from 9 a.m. until we boarded the bus later in the afternoon. My dad was extremely nervous about leaving me there, emphasizing that the station was located in a rough part of Cleveland, and he cautioned me to be careful. I brushed off his concerns, totally oblivious to the potential dangers. My dad drove me to the Greyhound station, where people were gathered waiting for their buses, and a few individuals loitered outside the entrance. It was a cold day. Inside the bus terminal, it was relatively empty. My dad helped me bring 2 large suitcases containing all of my belongings inside. Unfortunately, I couldn't leave them unattended and had to pay to store them at a locker near the front desk. Being broke, I couldn't afford the fee. I glanced wearily at the clock while my dad looked at me with sadness, clearly worried about me traveling alone. We hugged, and I tried to project confidence. After saying our goodbyes, he left. I had traveled multiple times before, both by playing on my own and with groups to various countries. Adventures wasn't something I shied away from. What I lacked was the ability to read people accurately. I genuinely believed in the inherent goodness of everyone, and had never experienced anything negative, even during late-night encounters in downtown New York. New York's robust public transportation system had made me accustomed to encountering wayrots, drunk people, and heated exchanges between passengers on buses. In this particular situation, I felt comfortable since I had taken public transportation alone many times. Returning to the Greyhound station, I decided to go outside for a cigarette. Now the challenge was keeping an eye on my 2 suitcases. I positioned them near the front desk in a way that allowed me to see them clearly from the entrance, where I then headed outside to satisfy my nicotine craving. I stood to the right of the front door, smoking and rummaging through my cheap and unattractive purse, which contained my passport, since I had irresponsibly lost my driver's license. As I searched through my purse, a man wearing a large knitted hat approached me and asked for a cigarette. I glanced at him and obliged, providing him with a cigarette and a light. We exchanged brief conversation, and I studied his face. He didn't really look creepy or menacing, although slightly disheveled. I couldn't determine if he was homeless. Nothing immediately raised red flags, and I felt secure as the area outside the terminal was populated with people, some smoking like me, and others briskly walking to their destinations. Notably, there was an older gentleman standing across from me on the left side of the entrance. While talking to the man in the hat, I noticed the older gentleman staring intently at me, as you'll soon understand why. The man in the hat inquired about my origin, if I was catching a bus, and commented on the cold weather in passing. I casually mentioned that I was running low on cigarettes. He looked at me and suggested, "Oh, there's a gas station just around the corner. You can buy some there." If I'm being honest, I pondered the idea briefly. My bus wouldn't depart from ours, so I could easily purchase a pack and return in time. However, remembering my unattended luggage held me back. I told him I would consider it, and turned the head back inside. Hours passed, and every so often, I would go outside to smoke. The man in the hat seemed to be there every time. At one point, he brought up the gas station again, insisting, "It's right there, I can take you." Once again I declined, not out of fear, but concern for my belongings. I returned inside. During my final trip outside, the street was eerily quiet, devoid of people. I grabbed another cigarette and placed my purse on the ground beside my feet. As I looked up, the man in the hat appeared once more, asking for money. It was at this moment that my gut feeling finally shifted, and an uneasiness washed over me. I replied saying that I didn't have much and couldn't help him. Hurriedly finishing my cigarette, I became acutely aware that my purse was lying exposed next to me. I quickly leaned over to retrieve it, mumbling something about going back inside. As I strained up, the man in the hat reached out, grabbed my purse, and said, "Let me help you with that." My body tensed, and I instinctively clutched my purse closer, responding, "I'm good," in that instant. The man in the hat transformed from a harmless stranger to a complete maniac. Through clenched teeth, he hissed at me to give him my purse. I could sense the suppressed anger in his voice. Desperate, I resisted. Realizing that no one was around to assist me, I started screaming for help. The man in the hat shot me with his hip, pushing me against the wall, snarling at me to shut up. Panic gripped me, as I realized that this man could easily produce a knife and harm me, or deliver a punch. Clung to my purse, praying that its flimsy handles would hold. His hands pressed down on mine as he pushed me again, hurling insults. I screamed even louder. Suddenly, from my left, I heard a voice ask, "Are you okay?" Remember the old gentleman I mentioned earlier? He seemingly materialized out of nowhere and loudly inquired about the situation. With my left thigh, I forcefully shoved the man in the hat, and at that moment he seemed to recognize that any harm he inflicted on me could easily be identified. He released my purse and fled, shaking uncontrollably. I tearfully ran inside, leading the older gentleman outside. I was too terrified to even utter a thank you. For the remainder of the day, I hovered by the front desk, consumed by fear. The thought of the 3-day January that Leia had filled me with dread. When the time came for me to board the bus to the train station, I glanced around and cheered at the other passengers. I couldn't fathom sitting next to anyone. Every person became a potential threat in my mind. I slumped into a seat and cowered by the window. Then I heard a voice behind me say, "I was going to warn you." Started. I turned my head. It was the older gentleman, casually seated behind me. My eyes must have been wide as dinner plates. "I knew he was targeting you. You need to be more careful." Tearfully, I expressed my gratitude to him. He silently stared out the window, nodding at an acknowledgement. And we didn't exchange any more words. That moment changed my life. I reflect on how insistent he was about me going to the gas station around the corner. The hairs on the back of my neck still stand up whenever I recall it. I'm not sure if he only would have just robbed me for the meager amount of money in my purse, because I would have been completely alone and helpless at that gas station.